Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Sustainable Activism webinar. So my name's Lisa Levinson, and I am the director of the Sustainable Activism Campaign for In Defense of Animals. As I mentioned, we're doing a live broadcast on Facebook right now, so I'm going to take a moment and navigate to the correct page here. Wonderful. Okie dokie. So welcome, everyone. Again, this is In Defense of Animals Sustainable Activism webinar. We're super excited to be able to broadcast live on our Facebook page. Hello to everyone out there. And this broadcast is our monthly webinar that we do for animal activists to provide some support and also strategies, techniques. It's a great opportunity to come together as a community and to learn from some of our leaders in the movement. Today, we're very fortunate to have Jonathan Balcombe with us. So I'm going to do a little introduction about Jonathan so you can learn a bit about him too. So Jonathan Balcombe, PhD, is a biologist, author, and a lifelong animal advocate. His 2006 book, Pleasurable Kingdom, which I have, is the first in-depth examination of animals' capacity to enjoy life. His subsequent books, Second Nature and The Exultant Ark, also present animals in a new light and presage a revolution in the animal-human relationship. His new books is the New York Times bestseller, What a Fish Knows, explores the private lives of the planet's most misunderstood and maligned vertebrates. Balcombe is Director for Animal Sentience with the Humane Society Institute for Science and Policy and Associate Editor for Animal Sentience, the first scholarly journal of animal feeling. He recently moved to Florida, where in his spare time he enjoys swimming, snorkeling, biking, baking, birding, buck, and trying to understand the lizards on his patio. So, wow, what a fabulous introduction for Jonathan. We're so grateful to have you here with us today. And let's see.
Thanks, Lisa.
Oh, wonderful. So you'll be able to see Jonathan, and also he has a presentation loaded up for us. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thanks, Lisa. Well, I'll launch right in. I expect this presentation will take about 45 minutes so that there'll be time for questions. In fact, I'll keep an eye on my watch here. Is 10 minutes enough time, Lisa, for questions at the end?
Perfect.
If I go to about, okay. All right, great. Thanks for being here, folks. So I'll leap right in with a bit of history. The roots of our modern day relationship to animals probably stem back at least 23 centuries to the time of Aristotle, who came up with the idea of the scala naturae, the natural scale, sort of a pyramid scheme that placed humans above all the other animals, although below God and the angels. 20 centuries later, in the 17th century, the French philosopher, mathematician, René Descartes further really diminished animal status by arguing infamously that they are mindless automatons, thoughtless beasts, having no feelings and therefore of no moral consequence. And these ideas are influential to the present day, with animals almost universally around the world being legally defined as the property of humans. And that manifests in some very unfortunate facts for animals. We kill about about 60 billion land animals every year and an unknown number of aquatic animals, vertebrate animals, estimated anywhere from a conservative end of about 200 billion to perhaps as many as 1 or 2 trillion a year. We kill almost all of them to eat them. We also kill a few 100 million for fashion, to satisfy our scientific curiosity, and for sport and recreation, quote unquote. We might summarize this kind of interaction with animals as based on a might makes right way of thinking. The idea that if you have the strength and the power to wield control over another group, then it's okay to do so. And might makes right has a pretty rich history in human behavior. It was used to justify colonialism, where European countries marched in and took over, in particular, African nations and some other countries around the world. The African slave trade is another manifestation of might makes right thinking, as is the subjugation of women's rights and the denial of civil rights. We've done a great deal to relegate those past social ills to the history books. There's still some progress to be done, of course. But we may ask where we're going. And a book I want to mention here is Steven Pinker's book, The Better Angels of Our Nature, Why Violence Has Declined. There's really not much controversy that violence has statistically declined in the last few decades, despite the fact that the 20th century with 2 world wars was a pretty violent one. The debate is more about why. Why has it happened? And Pinker offers a few what he calls civilizing processes that may help to explain a general trend away from brutality and violence in humans. One is statehood, the rise of elected officials instead of despots who rule because of genetics or some other not very good reason to be ruling. Feminization, the rise of the empowerment of women, women in political positions, female humans have been demonstrably shown to be more, on average, more nurturing and compassionate than males. And so a more feminized society is a less violent one, just generally speaking. Different countries at one time looked at each other as a source of slavery or other human resources or other kinds of resources, but now they're seen as trading partners. So the rise of international commerce is another factor that may reduce violence between countries. The rise of literacy, incredible increase in literacy rates during the 20th century, many tens of percentiles of literacy rates. Used to be, I think, down 20, 30%. Now it's 50, 60, 70% worldwide and rapidly rising. Cosmopolitanism sort of relating to international commerce, and the rise of reason. Human IQ scores have actually risen considerably in the 20th century. That can be speculated as to why that is, but it is definitely the case, and Pinker presents data on that as well. And at the same time as all of these changes, we have an unprecedented interest in animals as moral subjects, so an ethical concern for animals that really had no historical basis or very little basis back in Descartes' time, never mind Aristotle's. And this may be attributable to a number of factors, including the rise of moral thinking. Peter Singer, influential philosopher, regarded as the most influential living philosopher in the world, whose 1975 book Animal Liberation is widely regarded as the manifesto of the modern animal rights movement. Tom Reagan, sadly recently departed. His 1981 book Animal The Case for Animal Rights is another very important piece of literature that has helped to generate interest in more animals as moral subjects, animals as creatures with interests and therefore deserving having intrinsic rights. Other figures of importance, sorry that these are all white males, but that's just unfortunately how history has tended to place things. Women didn't have the opportunity to be as influential as they are today. So another illustration of the increase in feminization. Charles Darwin, his notion of evolution by natural selection, which is widely regarded as sort of a law of nature now, not really a theory anymore, is very significant here because it's an idea that shows that we're all connected. It showed that we didn't have to look up to the heavens and think of a bearded man, a creator, who might have looked a bit like Charles Darwin, but rather that the forces of evolution by natural selection over millennia, over millions of years, can create incredible complexity, but also shows that we are all connected, interconnected in flesh and blood with other creatures, bringing us closer to them. Donald Griffin, an American 20th century biologist, co-discovered echolocation in bats in the 1930s, although the bats had discovered it a long time earlier. Then started to write books about how animals think and feel back in the 1970s, and those were very influential, and I think we can credit him with helping to bring an era of what we now call cognitive ethology, the study of animal minds, animal thinking, animal emotions, animal feelings. And the journal that Lisa Levinson mentioned in the introduction to me, Animal Sentience, an open access online journal, is another sign of how science is now taking a great interest in animals' inner lives. That's certainly not a unique journal. It's unique in being focused on animal feeling and animal emotion, but there's also a journal called Animal Cognition, and there are other related journals that explore these matters. And then there's just some biologists who are so famous they hardly need introduction. You might not recognize the one on the left. That's Jane Goodall. So it's a very exciting time to be an ethologist, one who studies animal behavior. As I say, scientists are asking really great, interesting questions now that are revealing aspects of animals' lives that would have been deemed fantasy just a generation ago. Here's the front page, web page of this journal, Animal Sentience, that we've mentioned. I encourage you to go there and check out the more than 100 papers and commentaries that have been published already since the journal launched in December 2015. For instance, we just have a new paper under review about the possibility or the question of whether animals, meaning non-human animals, ever commit suicide. A very intriguing question, and certainly one that is open to debate and also open to scientific data. The rise of technologies is an important element, not just the scientific interest and will, but also the rise of technology allows us to see aspects of animals' lives that we couldn't see before. Here's an example from camera traps that are now put out in various locations in the wilds around the world. And here's a phenomenon that was discovered through those camera traps. Small African cats called genets actually ride large mammals, like here we have a white rhino in the upper left and an African buffalo in the lower right. They ride them like Uber taxis, or maybe they're lifts. I don't know which it is, but they ride them, and they get the benefit of a relatively safe perch. They can look down and see where things are. They don't use up energy moving around, and they can probably make a good attack from above if a little animal is scared away by this large hoofed mammal walking through the bush. The only drawback would be you have to go where the animal's going, but the animal probably goes in some areas that are quite fruitful for hunting small hunting cats. Here's another illustration that sort of combines technology with curiosity, the scientific curiosity of how animals think and feel. I had the pleasure of visiting the Clever Dog Lab in Vienna, Austria, 3 or 4 years ago, and these photos are from that lab where they train dogs. These are not lab-bred dogs. These are people's companion animals. They come in once, twice a week for a couple of hours, as long as they want to be there. If they get tired or they don't want to participate, they don't have to. And here we have an example of where they've been trained to put their head in a stirrup. You can see on the upper left, this little dog has the head resting in a headrest. They given rewards, as you can see, the dog on the right is being given a treat for doing that. And that's a way to get them to keep their head still, so they can watch videos. You can watch different photos presented to them, and you can find out, for instance, by showing these kinds of pictures, that dogs glance left when they look at a human face to read up the emotions. Well, this is the theory. There's more emotional content on that side of our faces because of our bilateral brains, and so they do that. And we glance left at human faces too. We do it like instantaneously, just for a few thousandths of a second. We're not even conscious we're doing it, but it's very useful for us to get a quick emotional read. So by presenting these pictures of dogs and humans, we find that we and they glance left with the row at the bottom, but they don't glance left with dog faces, not because dogs aren't emotional, as you can see here, the negative, neutral, and positive emotions, but more because they're not bilaterally distinct in the way that they are on human faces. So it's an interesting example of a phenomenon that's subconscious, but nevertheless very adaptive for emotional animals who also want to read the emotions of another individual. The shoe on the right, by the way, is a neutral stimulus presented to show that it wasn't some other aspect of the dog or the human face that they weren't cueing in on. By putting cameras above the dogs when they're looking at different stimuli, it's also been shown that they tend to wag their tails more to the left if they're apprehensive or stressed, and more to the right if they're relaxed and happy with the situation. Dogs communicate a lot with their tails, by the way. It's a shame that often they have their tails cut off for the vanity of breeding. when they're actually removing a really important communication tool. And some dogs are being trained to sit still in fMRI machines. These, again, are people's companion animals. This is being done by Greg Burns here at Emory University. He's also on our board of directors, on our editorial board for that journal that I mentioned. And the dogs, as you can see, wear ear covers because these machines are very noisy. But by being trained through treats, we can take active live images of their brains in different potentially emotive situations and see, for instance, how they respond emotionally when seeing a picture or smelling the armpit of a familiar human with an unfamiliar human, or the smell of a familiar dog versus an unfamiliar dog, or a familiar dog versus an unfamiliar human, and those sorts of comparisons. So there's any number of different types of studies that could be designed and that are being designed. And Burns is a gifted writer. He's got a new book coming out, What It's Like to Be a Dog and Other Adventures in Neuroscience. I just reviewed it. And he also has another previously best-selling book, Why Dogs Love Us, I believe was the title. Here's just another thing that we now notice. I don't know when this was first noticed, but dolphins slide down the faces, the heads of humpback whales. This seems to be a cooperative play. The whales seem to get into it just as much as their little cousins, the bottlenose dolphins, do. It's been observed dozens of times off the coast of Hawaii and I think elsewhere. I forget. Well, I don't. I'm not exactly sure why I had this slide. I introduced this slide in a talk I gave a couple of months ago, and I have to remember what it was for. But I guess I would just say it's nice that we're now beginning to turn our sights on some of the most abused animals, chickens being incredibly consumed by humans. We kill about 300 per second in the United States alone. And they're actually incredibly social, complex, intelligent animals with many different kinds of communication. It was shown in a study recently that hens appear to be empathic towards their chicks. They get stressed, their heart rates go up, and their blood pressure rises if they see their chicks being themselves stressed by having a puff of air blown against them. And as I summarize in my book, What a Fish Knows, science is showing aspects about fishes, their thinking, their emotion that most people are oblivious to, have no idea that these animals are capable of these things. What I do as a speaker and a science writer is to try to bring the science to light so that more people know about it, and in the hopes that that will sway opinions and affect how people view these other creatures. This is a photograph, an image from a paper published by a research team in Norway about a year and a half ago, showing a phenomenon called what the aquaculture industry calls dropouts. The salmon below is the same age as the one above, but the one below has been unable to cope with the stresses of intensive confinement. Essentially, aquaculture is factory farming of fishes, and stopped eating, became listless, and eventually floats to the top and dies. And we're talking huge numbers of fishes who suffer this fate. And by looking at cortisol levels, the stress hormone in the blood, and the behavior combined, the researchers concluded that these fishes are probably severely depressed. And that's a quote, severely depressed, in the journal that published it. It was just assumed that a stoic little animal like a mouse, you can't read emotions on their face. Not so anymore. Here we have what's called a pain scale or a grimace scale, with increasing pain to the right. I'm not advocating these studies that cause pain to animals, but scientists have done these studies carefully, looking at how faces change, how ears go back, cheeks bulge, whiskers change position, eyes squint. Vocalizations. There's a lot of ways that animals, even ones who try not to be detectable to predators and therefore tend to be stoic, nevertheless, their pain is readable. And by having a scale, scientists can look in the cages to see how the animal's looking and behaving, and know if they need to deliver painkillers. So again, I'm not advocating using rats, mice, and other animals in laboratory research. The fact is, it's still done with not tens of millions, but at least 100, probably 100 million or so of these creatures currently, per year. So probably better that we at least have scientific techniques to detect pain and deliver pain relief than if we didn't have those methods. Studies, for instance, have shown that a mouse is also empathic towards others. So if the mouse in the middle is writhing in pain, and they literally will writhe in pain when scientists inject them with some kind of painful acid, for instance, and another mouse, say the one on the right, on seeing the one in the middle writhing in pain, will herself be more susceptible to pain. Only herself, because males don't show this empathic response. Maybe that's getting back to the need for more feminization in societies. But female mice who know another mouse because they're social partners or their family members will show this empathic response. That's a picture of me with a rat. That rat's name was Lucy, but I forget why I was going to show the picture. Oh yeah, I know why. To remind myself to tell you about a recent study of rats that showed that they experience regret. So a rat who has just had an opportunity, if they'd have just waited long enough to get a nice treat, but they skipped it hoping that they could get a treat sooner at the next station, and then they have to wait even longer, they will in that situation they will look back wistfully at the previous station, indicating that they regret being impatient and making the decision to leave. So that's a very crude description of the study, but these are the kinds of studies scientists can devise, and they're probing and showing aspects of these animals' emotions that we didn't realize they had. All right, a little bit about how animals think. You may notice that not all of the objects in this picture are stuffed toys. There's about 1,000 stuffed toys, but there's also one real dog at the very top of the pyramid. Maybe this is a revision of Aristotle's natural scale with the pyramid scheme. Only this time we have a dog at the top, and I think dogs would probably place themselves there if they were given the opportunity anyway. I forget the name of this dog. No, my notes don't show that. This is I forget the name of the dog, but anyway, amazing dog he's a border collie, and he has memorized the names of, at last count, 1,022 different stuffed toys. So he can be told to go into a room. I mean, it would take a while with this many toys, but you can say, fetch me the green and blue starfish, or whatever the toy's name is, and he will fetch that out of 1,022 different toys. He also has a concept of novelty. If you give him a new toy, if you give him the name of a different toy that he never heard before, and he goes in and there's 50 toys and there's only one of them is one he's never seen, he'll grab that one, figuring by deduction that it must be the one that was requested. So remarkable cognitive skills, certainly in this case, memory and language, or certainly naming of things, labels. Do animals recognize themselves? The classic way of testing for self-awareness is the mirror self-recognition test. And in 2008, the magpie joined great apes, elephants, and dolphins on the list of the small list of animals who've so far passed the mirror self-recognition test. On seeing that yellow dot in a mirror that they couldn't see on themselves otherwise, the birds took to trying to remove the dot. If it was a black dot, which is the control case, they didn't try to remove the dot. They weren't aware it was there. So they were recognizing the reflection in a mirror as themselves. I just want to add that passing the mirror self-recognition test is a pretty vigorous evidence for self-awareness, but I would not say it doesn't follow that failing the test is necessarily a strong case for the animal not having self-awareness. And there are cases where some species have failed, quote unquote, failed the test and passed it later. But there's other explanations for them not seeing themselves in a mirror. The fact that they don't live with mirrors, for one thing. The mirror self, there's even preliminary evidence that some fishes may have self-awareness. Here's a manta ray, some still photographs from a paper published last year of a manta ray, one of two captive manta rays, pausing and seeming to regard themselves in this large mirror on the left. And they behaved in a way that suggests they didn't see the reflection as another manta, but instead themselves. The image on the lower right, in particular, seems to look like the animal's regarding him or herself. They haven't done the mark test yet, where they put a dot on the animal. That would be a better evidence, but that remains to be done. There is even evidence that an insect may have some level of self-awareness. These are some photographs from a paper published 1 or 2 years ago showing ants reacting differently in mirrors depending on whether they have a blue dot painted on the front of their face, letter C, for instance, or D, or a blue dot on the back of their head in F where they can't see it. They didn't show the same kind of interest in the reflection as they did when they could see the blue dot. So, this stuff is very dynamic. This is ongoing research. The interpretation is very difficult, but there's some intriguing data that are showing differential responses to different situations. So it remains to be seen. But insects and other invertebrates are coming into play now, more and more interest in them and discussion about how they may be also cognitive and possibly emotional as well. Tool use used to be on a list of things that were thought unique to humans, and that went down the tubes a long time ago. But few people are aware that crocodiles use tools. Here's a crocodile who has floated sticks and carried them to an area where there's large white birds called herons who are nesting overhead. Herons build their nests out of sticks, and there's quite a premium on sticks during nesting season. So by floating below the surface after carrying these sticks to this location, the crocodile can launch a surprise attack from below if and when the heron comes down to pick up the sticks. So it's pretty sophisticated planning and tool use that involves it's location and time specific. Herons only nest in certain locations, and they only nest at certain times of the year. And you don't have crocodiles doing this outside of that season or in other locations. Yes, we have tool use in fishes as well. This is a tusk fish. You can watch a neat video on YouTube of a different tusk fish doing similar behavior, using water as a tool to blow sand and uncover a clam, a mollusk, and then carrying the mollusk quite deliberately to a hard rock, a large rock that's then used as an anvil to smash the rock open with a series of well-timed head flicks and releases. So fishes have limited physical capabilities to use tools. They don't have grasping hands, but they do have a mouth, and they can use their mouth and other objects in their surroundings as tools. This is a social bird, a member of the corvid family, which tend to be known to be brainy. They're crows and ravens and jays. This is a scrub jay. Scrub jays are caching birds. They bury food, and they've been shown to bury food strategically. They will also remember where they buried certain kinds of food. They know if the food is going to rot sooner than another kind of food, they'll return sooner to retrieve their cache. So obviously they need an incredibly good spatial memory to remember sometimes thousands of different things they buried in the warmer months, and then they need to recover them in the cold winter months where they live. But also they're aware of who's being watched. If another jay is watching them while they bury, they will often return shortly thereafter when the other bird is no longer there and move it somewhere else, because they sometimes get their stashes pilfered by other jays. Only jays who themselves have stolen other jays' food caches will do this. So it takes a thief to know one in jay society. A recent study also showed they will strategically bury food according to how noisy the substrate is. If they know that a bird is nearby and cannot see them but can hear them, they would rather bury food in sand than in gravel, because gravel makes more noise, and that bird behind the screen might be able to detect that they're burying something. So there's a lot of incredibly fine-tuned inner awareness among these animals going on. Squirrels also caching animals where they bury food to come back and get later, which again means you got to have a good memory. It also does a lot of favor to trees. A squirrel who forgets or unfortunately dies and can't retrieve a buried acorn may be helping a future oak tree grow health into a healthy tree by giving it a head start. But squirrels will also fake bury. They will carry a seed, put it on the ground, pretend to bury it, and then move off when they haven't buried it at all and carry it somewhere else. Or else not have any seeds and just pretend to be burying. So they do this apparently to fool others into maybe teaching them that just because you saw me bury something doesn't mean you're going to get it. That can be speculated as to what they may be thinking. Maybe one day we'll come up with experiments to figure that out. Maybe fMRI machine studies. But anyway, it's intriguing the kind of deception and really Machiavellian behavior that goes on in these animals. I want to talk a little bit about pleasure. I've written 2 books about pleasure, this one and this one. And I wrote those books because it's a neglected subject. I spent 10 years studying biology at 3 universities, and I don't remember ever animals' behavior putting in a context of positive affect or pleasure. Reward may have been mentioned a few times, but pleasure is generally overlooked. And I'm happy to say that scientists are taking a greater interest in that nowadays too. You can see the subtitle of the journal here, Biology of Fun, a special edition of Current Biology, which is a pretty influential biology journal. This was just a few years ago, January 2015, and there was about 8 or 10 papers here focused on these animals' capacity for fun. I'm not going to have time to show any videos. I had a couple of videos I could show, but just suffice to say that you can watch videos from a study done in the Netherlands where they actually put out running wheels and found that wild animals would run in them. Not just mice, rats, frogs, toads, even a slug got in and did a half a way around. It took about an hour, I think. So very slow in the case of the slug. But I like this idea because it tends to refute the popular notion among biologists that it's a very constant struggle for survival out there and that it's all earnest and there's no time for any kind of pleasure or joy. I think that's a very, very small, narrow view of wild nature. Animals do enjoy doing what's important to them, aside from just having fun. The power of touch is one element of pleasure in animals' lives. I think touch is an overlooked source of pleasure by us in animals' lives, and animals do engage in a lot of behaviors that are clearly pleasurable. If you've petted a cat, scratch their chin, stroke them, you'll know that they have certain spots they really love to be petted. It's kind of mutual pleasure because it feels nice to us as well. We also enjoy seeing their pleasure. This was a street cat in the Netherlands, by the way. Long-lived social animals especially use touch as a way to reinforce social bonds, to remind others that they're glad they're part of the group. Here we have 3 adult macaws in a 3-way preening fest. This is called allo preening another. There's a great YouTube video. If you haven't seen it, just go to YouTube at some point and put in lizard tickle or lizard tickle on the belly, and you'll see there's actually more than one video now of people's pet lizards flopping onto their backs and waving their legs while they're tickled in the belly. I'm not making this up. I mean, when I saw that first time, it really surprised me. It's also worth mentioning that another aspect that's changing things rapidly is the availability of the information. A picture tells 1,000 words, but a video tells 1,000 pictures. Very convincing to see those things, and not everybody, but a growing populace around the world has access to this information, readily available access online. I think it really is an important force for change in our attitudes towards animals. Rats love to be tickled. They make great pets. There's some series of pretty famous studies now by an American neuroscientist named Jaak Panksepp, who died just last year or a few months ago, earlier this year. And he did studies showing that rats appear to be laughing. They're tickled in the belly if it's by a trusted hand. And they love to be tickled in the belly. They will run to a hand 4 times as quickly as they will to get a belly rub, as 4 times as quickly as they will if they expect to be petted on the neck, which they like, but not nearly as much as a belly rub. So, and their brains are active in the same parts of the brains are active as our brains when we're laughing, when we're being tickled, or we're laughing at something else. So there's really good empirical evidence that these animals are experiencing some kind of mirth in it, something comparable to what we would experience in similar situations. Oh yeah, their ears turn pink as well. A recent study shows that happy, relaxed rats have pinker ears than ones who are stressed. Even uncivilized animals like the one on the left can be tamed. I had the pleasure of meeting a warthog who in a suburb of Cape Town, South Africa, a few years ago. What a sweet creature! Just like a domesticated dog. Also, this animal had made I forget it was a he or she, own bathtub in the yard, and took a wallow after this photo was taken. Warthogs, incidentally, will wander into areas where they know there's a colony of banded mongooses, and then they flop down in an invitation gesture to be given a spa treatment. The mongooses swarm over them to find parasites and bits of salt and such, and the warthog gets a parasite removal service and a delightful spa treatment, and everybody seems to be happy. Hippopotamuses will get similar treatment from various species of fishes by spreading their legs, splaying their toes, opening their mouths, so that the fishes can remove plaque, algae, various undesirables from their skin. And sometimes the hippos will drift off into a blissful sleep. In parts of northwest India, feral dogs have taken up cohabitation with troops of langur monkeys, wild langur monkeys, who groom them in return probably for protection. The dog is a predator and probably can help to ward off or maybe raise the status of the colony of monkeys, probably a number of different benefits. And the dog gets parasite removal and spa treatment in return. So a classic mutualism that has a number of manifestations, and it seems to be the pleasure of touch is really critical and central to it. We may ask, is it this kind of a therapeutic kind of pleasure? Is this touch actually benefiting the animal's health, as we know it does for us? Well, baboon mothers who've lost an infant will engage in and are grieving based on cortisol measures measured from fecal samples collected in the wild. Will show that their cortisol is high, suggesting they're stressed and or probably grieving this loss. And there's increasing evidence for animal grief, such as Barbara King's book, Why Animals Grieve. They will groom more after this loss, presumably, and it seems to improve their stress profile. That seems to give therapeutic relief of their depression or their feeling blue about losing a loved one. Surgeon fishes who have been stressed by mean-spirited but curious scientists, and then given the opportunity to get a strokes, get massages from a wand, it's a mechanical wand that moves back and forth, they will swim up to that wand and get stroked. They will ignore the wand if it's stationary and can't stroke them. And their stress levels in the first group come down markedly. I described this study in my book, needless to say. Happy to say that the surgeon fishes used in the study, 32 of them were all returned to their homes on the Great Barrier Reef. That's another sign that we're improving in our approach to animals, because scientists typically don't report that and don't do it. But there's a growing trend where scientists are trying to do the right thing by the animals that they study, as they should. There's various other sources of animal pleasure beyond touch, of course: food, play, social companionship, comfort, and sex. My sex slide. Animals don't have sex year-round, depending on the species, but when they do, they're very, very engaged. I think it's reasonable to suggest that because sex, while not critical to individual survival in the way that food is, nevertheless is critical to genetic survival and success. So I think it's reasonable to expect that they may be highly motivated and that they get pleasure out of it. I refer you to a 1999 book called Biological Exuberance, which is a fascinating survey of same-sex coupling in particular in the animal kingdom, or queendom, if you will. I guess I want to talk a little about fishes here. I know I'm getting a little short on time, so I'm going to be skipping through some slides perhaps, because I want to give people a chance to ask some questions. I still have 19 minutes total in the session, so I may take up maybe another 10 minutes of that before I take questions. This is my latest book, What a Fish Knows, and I want to talk about a few things about the lives of fishes, which, as I say, have been kind of neglected and misunderstood. Here's two cleaner wrasses. You can see one, the little fish coming out of the gill cover of this map pufferfish, a so-called client fish, who's enjoying the ministrations of these two. The other one is just above the eye of the map pufferfish, just the head of the cleaner. You can just see poking into view. So these two are working in tandem as a team. They have their particular spot on the reef, and client fishes will line up to wait their turn to get serviced by these cleaners, who remove parasites from the gills. They swim into the client's mouth with impunity. Clients don't eat them, even though they could, because you just don't eat your business partner. It's not a good way to maintain business relations. And so the client fish gets, once again, parasite removal, spa treatment, which includes caresses. Sometimes the cleaners will take a break from cleaning and will actually stroke the clients, perhaps to curry extra favor for them because they want them to come back to them and not some other cleaner station. In return for food, for the cleaner fishes, they get food as their part of the bargain. So it's their job, the cleaners. It's how they make a living. And it's Machiavellian because sometimes cleaners don't do such a good job. Clients notice that. They will jolt if they're nipped by cleaners to try and, who may be interested in getting a bit of that mucus, that slimy layer on the outside. It's very nutritious. And the jolting probably informs other clients that maybe they want to go elsewhere today because these cleaners aren't doing a good job. So there's careful studies teasing apart these kinds of nuanced relationships that, 5 minutes on the reef looking at this, you would never know all this stuff was going on. There's probably over 150 published scientific papers already on this relationship with new discoveries coming to light all the time. And probably because fishes like to be stroked, they will actually approach trusted divers to get strokes. Here's a Nassau grouper getting a stroke from a diver off the coast of Florida. And there's no parasite removal going on here. As far as I know, there's no food either. And yet the grouper goes to get the strokes. How animals live socially is also a window into various aspects of their inner lives, including virtue. It behooves one to be nice to others, such as these monkeys here, showing deference and affection, because those others know you and they will remember you next week. And if you do a good deed today, they may do a good deed to you next week. Not to suggest that that's the only motivation for being nice is just selfish interest, but there are benefits to being nice to others. That's called reciprocal altruism, is the jargon term in science. But also kin selection is a basis for being nice to others. If they share copies of your genes, that's another reason why we may favor family members over strangers. Herrings live in social groups. They also communicate with flatulent. They actually communicate with their own farts, and it's a way that they can make sounds that can be up to 7-second long. Try that at home if you want, and they can use that to communicate information from across the school about whether it's getting dark and maybe time to migrate to a lower part of the water column for safety. Democratic decision making like that is done by a number of animals, and herrings are included, and they use this unique way of communicating that sort of information. Maybe I'm belaboring this theme too much with birds who preen others, but this is another illustration, perhaps a little out of order. But little birds who preen each other, these birds look similar to us, but they probably know each other as individuals, and they remember a good deed from one week to the next. Ethiopian wolves forage frequently among Chacma baboons, not chacmas, I forget the name of the baboon here, Hamadryas, maybe. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Troops of foraging monkeys. And there's no predator-prey going on between them, but they both benefit from each other's presence. Perhaps vigilance for danger, but perhaps more so it's thought because the baboons will flush out little mammals that the wolf is keen to eat. These wolves are highly endangered, by the way, so it's helpful if they can benefit from being among baboons. Honey guides. This is a honey guide so named by humans because they actually cooperate with language. They have a particular call to let native humans, human people in the woods know that they found a source of honey or they want to go find some. The guides actually primarily eat the wax. They're unusual among animals in being able to digest beeswax. But they know that the humans want the honey, and the humans can get the bees' honeycomb out and smash it on the ground. So they'll leave a mess that the honey guide can then eat the wax afterwards. So both groups benefit from this relationship, and each recognizes the other's call that's specific to I want to go get honey or I want to go get wax. And society, as I mentioned, leads to virtue. When we live in groups, we tend to be better behaved, and virtue is found all over animal behavior. Parental care is a form of virtue. It's a self-sacrifice of an individual to raise another member of their family. Sure, it's one who shares the genes, but the one who shares the most genes is oneself. So it is nevertheless a level of virtue that we would help another individual who's our child. Fishes also help their children. In this case, it's a mouth brooder, a male. Usually it's dads who do the mouth brooding. They protect their young by taking them in their mouths, and then they let them out again when the coast is clear. Parental care in birds. The father, oyster catcher, is on the left, feeding his fledged chick on the right, teaching him probably how to forage as well as giving him food. Bats have been shown to do the reciprocal altruism thing where females will share a blood meal. This is a vampire bat, will share a blood meal with another female in their colony who's genetically not closely related. So it appears not to be kin selection, but they help them because they help them, and they are more likely to receive help from that individual at some later date if they are giving birth or they're ill and can't go out and forage themselves. So there's evidence from the field for this phenomenon of reciprocal altruism between not closely related adults. Even rattlesnakes are social. They have groups, they hibernate in groups, they rest together, they seem to have favorites. There's some, I believe, evidence of parental care as well. So I shouldn't say even, because it sort of reinforces the idea that they're lower caste. They shouldn't be. We've really overlooked reptiles. I'm thinking of writing a book about them one day because they've really been underestimated, as we tend to do. Here's virtue in rabbit fishes, where one individual is looking up, one individual of each pair, these are 4 different species, is looking up, playing lookout to watch the back of the other one who's foraging head down, getting algae in the reef, which is a pretty vulnerable position. And then they switch off, so everybody gets fed safely. Prairie Dogs have this famous alarm call series. They have different calls for different threats. It's kind of virtuous to make the call because you're drawing attention to yourself, but they will do it unhesitatingly, and they help the whole colony by doing so. So certainly virtuous behavior there. If you've read Jane Goodall on chimpanzees, the ones that she studied back in the 60s through the 90s, through the 80s, I should say, males really didn't show much parental care, but it's now been documented in some other populations of wild chimpanzees of males actually adopting orphaned infants and raising them, which is a huge investment. So that certainly flies in the face of some old assumptions we had about males not being virtuous or caregivers in chimpanzees. They can be, depending on the population. And here's a curious phenomenon. Also virtuous and across species. There's 3 species here. The one in the background is an orca, interested in getting a hold of that seal, that Weddell seal on that ice floe. But then we have this large humpback whale who comes into the fray, and humpback whales are repeatedly being observed to rescue seals from attacking orcas. And here's a close-up of a photograph that was taken. You can see the seal just right of center, looking rather bewildered, being escorted on the belly of this humpback whale away from danger. Quite remarkable behavior. We can speculate till we're blue in the face as to what kind of motives are going on with the orcas, but it's fascinating behavior, and it's definitely virtuous and very touching, I have to say. I love this picture. I mean, I look at that seal and I can relate to an animal who is highly emotional, probably scared. I won't say the word, it would have been a swear word. Very scared and bewildered, but probably, I'm sure, very grateful for the help. Not time to go through some of these. I'm just going to finish up. That's a Greenland shark. Oh, I'll just briefly mention the new record holder of longevity among vertebrates is the Greenland shark, based on an analysis of corneal tissue, which is laid down kind of like tree rings as a way to measure the age of a tree. Just short of 400 years old was one fish taken by fishermen who was presumably healthy when caught, so would probably have lived beyond 400 years if given the chance. Just to sum up then, before I finish, sentience, the capacity to feel, I regard it as the bedrock of ethics. The foundation of our moral systems is that others can feel. And so sentience is a very important concept that needs to become part of the regular parlance of our language. Hopefully more people will become familiar with that word. Animals are sentient, they're individuals, they're beings. They don't just have biology, but they have biographies as well. And they have preferences, and they have private moments of pleasure and fun. We may argue where to draw the line on sentience, but wherever we draw it in pencil, because new information all the time is causing us to revisit that. Snails will self-stimulate given the chance. So they're also close, well, they're in the same phylum as octopuses and squids, about whom there's not really any doubt anymore that they're sentient. So snails may well be sentient too. And unfortunately, we've tended to have a dominionistic relationship to all other animals, sentient creatures, as symbolized with this elephant who carries a ponderous chain, and the man gives the commands and tells the elephant what to do. The elephant would probably rather be out in the woods there. And we're very fickle about how we define animals and how we categorize them. Depending on where you are in the world, most of the world, certainly the West, the animal on the right is a beloved pet, and the one on the left is a source of food. In some parts of the world, the one on the left is a sacred creature, and the one on the right is slaughtered for food. And food is where it's at in our evolving relationship to animals. Back to that number I showed earlier, 98%. The best way we can help animals is to change our dietary habits. If we stop eating them, or ideally stop eating them, but we can even reduce consumption of them, it still helps, then we are removing our support for the most harmful industries to animals and the planet and our health. And I love what Anne Frank said, which really is sort of a statement for the immediacy with which we can take action and change the world. Very one of the most empowering statements I've ever read. And just the last thought, karma. I love the notion of karma, the idea of what goes around comes around. If you're kind to others, good things tend to come to you. Generally speaking, if we're nice, and if we live in a world that's nicer to animals, we're going to be, by extension, we're going to be a less violent world across the board, including to each other. That's the kind of world I want to live in. Thanks for listening. I'm still here, so I don't know how the question and answer goes, but I'm happy to take any questions that people may have.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Jonathan. I thoroughly enjoyed your presentation. I always learn something new, and I'm really excited about your reptiles book, so I'd encourage you to do that.
Yeah,
I
future
especially
date.
I agree with about the snakes and reptiles. They definitely another class of creatures that get maligned in our culture and many around the world. So I wanted to invite anyone who wants to ask a question. This is an open forum. You can do that by either sharing your webcam. You can also unmute yourself if you're on the computer next to the audio icon, which looks like a microphone. You can click that, and that would unmute you. You can also type in the chat box. We have a chat box here, and that's fine to do too. I know we have several people on the phone with us today, and if that's the case, you can press *4 to join the conversation that way and ask Jonathan a question. Let's see, I think I hear someone.
I don't.
No? Okay. So if anybody'd like to join in, ask a question, that is fine. That would be great. And I also wanted to recognize, Jonathan, something I didn't realize is that this journal of animal sentience is something that you've put together.
Yes, I was on the team that it was somebody else's idea, but I was on the team that formulated it and put together the rules of the journal and that sort of thing.
Wow, that is amazing. Very exciting. Very exciting. So
Yeah, we're really very, very pleased with it.
And for those of you who are on the computer, Jonathan has put together some of his contact information on as part of his last slide. So for anyone who wants to reach out to Jonathan, maybe if you're in a noisy environment and you're not able to ask a question directly, you can certainly reach out to him. That would be fine too.
Yeah, I often hear from people that way.
Good. And I don't see anything in the chat box here. So, oh, here's someone.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes, please tell us your name.
Hi, my name is Molly Flanagan, and I'm calling in from Oakland. Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate hearing your perspective. And I've been studying transspecies psychology with Gabe Bradshaw. So this is all
Okay, yes.
Yeah, this is very much in line with a lot of what I've been learning and exploring. And I'm curious about it sounds like when you were talking about some of the experiments that are going on with dogs that are more autonomous and more them kind of choosing whether or not to participate, it sounds like there may be some shift, but I'm wondering how much you're seeing in terms of any kind of shift within the scientific community in terms of recognizing the sentience and then changing our behavior towards animals as experimentees?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not really well plugged into the animal experimentation scene in terms of the laboratory type research and testing that's done. I'm more plugged in. I used to be more plugged into that in the 90s when I was working on that, closer to that issue with the Humane Society of the United States. I'm more plugged in now to the kind of behavioral research that goes on, some of which is kind of lab-based, but much of it is in the field. So I couldn't give you a strong answer on that. I do know that there's a lot more discussion about the 3 Rs, for instance: replacement, reduction, and refinement, replacing animals with other methods, reducing the numbers used, and refining methods so that they cause less suffering. That's been ongoing, but it's also been frustratingly slow in the past. So there is growing interest there, but certainly in the area of behavioral research, the example of the surgeon fishes who were released back into the Great Barrier Reef is a subtle but nevertheless an example of how scientists are becoming more and more sensitive to the ethical issues. More and more journals also require their authors to have an ethical statement about where the animals were from, how were they treated, what was their fate in the study. So there are signs of change in different disciplines in science.
Thank you.
Sure.
And thank you for speaking up. I appreciate it. It's always nice to have live conversation as part of our webinar. We also have Casey, who's on the line here with us, and she sent me her question, which is, she's wondering. She mentioned that she's been studying telepathic animal communication, and asks if that's something you've ever explored, and if so, what do you think about it?
I've not explored it directly. I've had conversations with animal communicators, and two aspects of my response. I'm skeptical. I'm naturally skeptical as a scientist about phenomena that are difficult to explain physically, but I'm also acutely aware that animals are incredibly, and particularly non-human animals who don't have the detailed spoken language that we tend to have, ways of communicating specific information with their tongues. Um, I would say they rely more on their intuitions and their senses, and so that they can be incredibly perceptive of incredibly subtle things. Clever Hans, the horse who was, touted to be great at doing math, was in fact cueing into incredibly subtle cues from the human who didn't even know they were giving those cues. So that's just one historical illustration of the incredible perceptiveness of animals, that they can pick up information that is almost in the waves, in the airwaves, without actually being palpable physically. As for telepathy itself, science it's testable, and science is gonna be the adjudicator over time. There are some studies done by Rupert Sheldrake's that was published in a scholarly journal, very controversial, suggesting that a parrot, in this case a parrot Inkisi, could had telepathic abilities, was able to describe a photograph being looked at by his human guardian in another room in the house with much higher, statistically higher probability of describing relevant aspects about the photo than by chance. So there is some published evidence, but not very much. If it's a real phenomenon, I think we will start to see more and more of it in the published literature. So time will tell.
Well, thank you for addressing that question. We have another one in our chat box by Marilyn. She said that your presentation was very enjoyable, and is wondering if you have any thoughts on how dogs sense death of other dogs whom they've lived with. She's not sure if they grieve per se, but any studies or thoughts as to their inner process.
Glad you enjoyed the talk, Marilyn. No, I haven't seen much on that. I would refer you to Barbara King's How Animals Grieve, but I don't recall how much is on dogs in there. But once again, eminently testable, and in fact, now with the fMRI studies being done, with that method being developed and refined, wouldn't it be interesting to look at how the brain activity is in a dog who has just lost another dog companion or a human companion, or something maybe less grave, but nevertheless a negative event, and to see how the brain responds to that. And the comparator in these cases usually is the human brain. We can also get people to sit in rely on fMRI machines and see how their brain is feeling, and we can look at people who just lost a loved one, and so we can see how their brains may respond comparable to us. So we can look at behavior, which is a very good tool. How does the dog look and how does the dog behave? Does the dog stop eating, or the cat? And there's lots of evidence for that. There's not really any question that they grieve, but what sort of emotions they're feeling, that's a very interesting question, in addition to the other ones.
And Marilyn goes on to say that at times the family dog or dogs are present during euthanasia, and sometimes they're not. And she was wondering what the processes may be in going on inside during that kind of situation.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure if I understood that. So she's talking about a scenario where a living companion animal is present while another one is being euthanized.
Yeah.
That's something I wasn't aware of. I mean, I've been present with having cats who I've known euthanized individually, but the other cats were never present. I guess this would be cases maybe where the vet comes to the house and does a house call, and I do think that's a good refinement. Cats especially hate going to the vet. Let's face it. So having the vet come to them is not fun, but it's less bad, less stressful for them. But there is that interesting question about whether it's a good idea to have the other animal looking on. I can see both sides of that coin. Where maybe the closure. I brought euthanized cats home from it to let the other cats see and sniff and just perhaps know and maybe have a bit of closure. Who knows? But so I'm not aware of much study on that. I think it's a really interesting question. And once again, science can tell us, can probe and get some clues as to how the animal feels and whether the animal feels differently if and when he or she can witness the euthanasia of a friend or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very interesting questions. Thank you so much,
Yeah.
Marilyn. I appreciate that. And Casey also added to her comment was that she thinks the communications between animals are even more sophisticated than using speech.
Yeah, depending on how you define sophisticated communication. Fishes use referential gesturing to referential signaling to recruit others of different species. We have proven ourselves not especially adept at communicating across species barriers, and there's at least 2 fish species that do it quite well. So we should not, just as a general comment, we should not always think of humans as the gold standard. There's many things that animals do that they do more proficiently than we do. Like many animals can smell more things than we can smell. They have a better sense of smell, better vision, better sense of hearing, and those sorts of things. So just physically alone, cognitively, why not? If it's a useful skill. I don't think I could. I lose my phone a lot of the time. That's one object. Some birds can remember where they buried over 20,000 nuts and seeds during the warmer months and can remember that many during the cold months. So, I mean, they have some amazing cognitive abilities that go far beyond what a human can do.
Great. And then actually we have Molly, who's in the chat box, who responded to Marilyn, who was saying that she had volunteered at Bright Haven, a sanctuary that specializes in aging dogs, cats, and others, and does hospice care on site. Most are able to go through a natural dying process. So she doesn't know how euthanasia might relate, but there the animals gather close and hold vigil until the individual is dying. It is quite beautiful. I can say that I've witnessed that myself in the cats that I've lived with, that they will hold vigil around the animal that's not feeling well.
Yeah, my colleague and friend Mark Beckhoff, another ethologist and author of many books on animal behavior, has described what he calls a funeral among magpies around a fallen comrade. So there's anecdotal evidence for that, and some of this stuff can be studied by carefully designed scientific studies as well.
Well, thank you so much for bringing those studies to light for all of us. I mean, we really appreciate it. It's so nice to have your voice in the scientific world and also in the animal rights world. It's really important to have this diversity of professionals who are creating this revolutionary movement to help animals and to really question, challenge, and the way we think about them.
Yeah, I agree, and it's so important to link the ethics to the science. Science doesn't happen in a vacuum. If the science doesn't have any take-home message about our evolving ethics and morals, then it's not nearly as valuable as if it does.
And another comment, Gina says, this has been wonderful. Molly also said, thank you so much, and added, until every animal is. Do you hold these webinars often? So our Sustainable Activism campaign, we hold webinars that are focused on these topics once a month, and you can tune in. It's usually the first Thursday of every month. But I know that Jonathan also speaks regularly. I don't know if you have anything upcoming, or if you have perhaps they can go to your website to see.
Yeah, I try to put my upcoming speaking books on my events page, speaking events on my events page on my website. Going to be in Portland, Oregon in October. Going to be in various places in Florida where I live, Boston, New York, Toronto, VegFest, various events. So you can check it out there. I try to update that pretty regularly. I also include that list on my monthly newsletter, All Things Fish, which you can subscribe to on my website, also on that last slide.
Yes, and for those of you who are on the phone, the website is Jonathan, and then it's -Balcombe, BALCOMBE.com. So you can find him there. Again, thank you so much to everyone for joining us for this lively conversation. Of course, to Jonathan for sharing your wisdom and knowledge with us. And if anyone wants to stay tuned for our next Sustainable Activism webinar, that will be, I believe, September 7th. And we have Jessica Dulce. She is a well-known advocate for activists promoting self-care to prevent compassion fatigue. And she's worked in a lot of different animal shelter situations. So she'll be a wonderful guest as well. For those folks who tune into our weekly webinars, we have a vegan spirituality gathering next Thursday. And Andrew Bear, who is a vegan Buddhist, is going to talk about the connection between veganism and Buddhism. So we hope you can join us for that. And we are also broadcasting from the Animal Rights Conference this time, which is very special and a wonderful event. If anybody's there, you can definitely stop by the In Defense of Animals booth. I would love to meet you in person. We're going to be hosting an activist support circle on Saturday during the lunch, and an interfaith vegan coalition during the Sunday lunch. So thanks to everyone for joining us and for tuning in to our events. You can also find more of our events listed on our events page, which is idausa.org//events. And for those of you who don't know, we also run a support line for animal activists who can call to receive free counseling from other activists who are counselors and professional therapists. That number is 800-705-0425. So we're here to support you all the way. So thanks again to everyone for tuning in, and we hope we see you again sometime soon in part of our activist community. Have a wonderful evening, everyone.
You too. Bye-bye.
Good night. Thanks, Jonathan. Bye, everyone.
You're welcome, Lisa. Enjoy the conference.
Thank you.